people are sick, particularly in organizations, but also regarding to personal growth, kinds of potential clients. And I think I shared in my introduction, you know, a lot of potential people who may be, you know, interested in this. Nonprofits, community organizations, educational institutions, from kids right up. So, and empathy within a faculty lounge, for God's sakes. You know, there's so many issues here. And, you know, your experience has been so much professionally, the lack thereof in many areas, both system-wide, but also in regard to, you know, teachers should be there saying, hey, we're all with a cause, but in different ways. And instead, the internalized oppression of being a teacher causes teachers to go at one another and to have little kind of cliques. And you know, so that, come on in and grab what you like. So they're married.
Okay.
They're also both, this is their firm.
Okay.
So, and that hit me as part of what I want to try to do. So the death by PowerPoint kinds of stuff, the talking at people, the, you know, the whole thing that training isn't learning, kind of a piece. So how do we, and it really is around storytelling. I was reading an article a number of months ago in the New York Times Sunday Review, and it really talked about empathy and issues in regarding to how do we get Ferguson white folks and leaders and cops and teens and young fathers who are black to understand how can people empathize one with another. And as the politics gets worse and worse in the country, how do you get people from the extremes to, you know, and part of my life has tried to be to survive, to try to survive ethically. We all struggle on that. And how can I have discussions with people, and I'm thinking of particular examples, in which I can find ways to bridge something while still not selling myself out in order for folks to rethink something rather than it's always an either or or a but rather than an and in what's going on in the country. So how one of the thoughts for me when I read the article which said research shows it's not so easy to train people into empathy or to cause people to be empathic, particularly around areas that are not of the self. So I can be empathic towards my kid, but if the neighbor moves in who's a different cultural background, their kid I may have no empathy with. So how do we work on this at adult, at young levels, at corporate and nonprofit? And part of it it began to feel like storytelling. And so, and then Harold and I had a breakfast together, and
a couple.
First of all, I wanted to say the woman who didn't want to talk about her age was laughing at us about breakfast.
Okay.
I just want you to know, I'm not going to go further than that as to what stereotype she uses. It's okay.
Another cup of coffee. Tea with honey. Oatmeal. So, go ahead.
So the idea is to engage people in sharing authentically their own stories. When I say their own, it may be their own, or it may be something we've heard, experienced, observed as close to the reality. So if it may be a secondary source, not the primary source. So like I'm working in a workshop and there's this older African American man in a social work conference that I'm facilitating, and we're talking about race, and there's blacks and whites and Hispanic, all kinds. And he says, well, this is a story actually, and he says, oh no, I never experienced racism. And he was raised in Alabama or and from a young boy, and he said, you know, I'm just a person, and I'm, you know, and other people are saying, well, you know, didn't you have an experience? No, I don't have those kinds of experiences. And he's like, you know, like you, like late 60s, and he's been through a lot of issues And he talked about education, social work, right? I mean, my God, the abuse and the lack of appreciation and the targeting and all that you get by your family and friends and society around those kinds of things. So, as we're sharing and talking, he starts talking about, well, maybe I have some memory. Maybe this, I have a story. And this is after other people are telling stories. And then he starts telling a story of remembering, and I really want to be true to the story because as we tell stories, sometimes they get related.
Sure.
But, and he says he remembers when he was like 5, 6 years old, and there were dirt roads in the South, and in those days, black and white kids would play till adolescence, and then they weren't allowed to play anymore. But there was a lot more mixes than people talk about. In any case, he was home with his dad. His mom had died, and his dad was in a wheelchair and all this. And so his dad asked him to go to the general store down the road to get some supplies for the house, and he gave him a list of stuff to go down and get. And so he walks and whistling down the road, dirt road, to the general store. And the general store is owned by white people with black people working there. And he gets in there, and there's this line of people ordering things. So he gets behind. This is a 6-year-old kid, and he's behind, and he waits. And then his turn, and then finally he gets to the front of the line, and he says, okay, here's my dad's list of what I need. And all of a sudden, out of a Cadillac comes this big white dude who's known in the community. Big Stetson hat, the whole stereotype, white Cadillac. And said, excuse me, boy. And he goes right to the front of the line. And the black kid says, excuse me, sir, you're butting in. And that's the language that, in school, you're butting in. He says, don't sass me back, boy. And he continues, excuse me, sir, it's my turn first. So, says, aren't you Joe's kid? Last name? He says, yeah, he's my dad. Get in here, Richard. 68-year-old man is telling the story, social worker.
It's in the 60s day.
I know.
What the heck? Since she's 68, I say.
All right.
Oh, she's getting a little pissed now. So,
You're really making it.
so he's in the line in Alabama at the general store. And, excuse me, sir, you're butting in. So, aren't you Joe's boy? He said, yes. You keep talking like that. Sass me back, I'm going to settle it with your dad because he knows me. He doesn't work for me. And he butts in, and the guy says, "But sir," he says, "I've had it with you." He picks up the kid by the collar, walks out, storms out the store, opens the back of his Cadillac door, throws the kid in the back seat, gets in the car, and drives down the road because he knows where the father lives. He gets out of the car, takes the kid, picks him up, throws him on, opens the screen door, throws him on the floor. The father looks up, says, "What happened? What's going on?" And this big guy walks in. "Hello, Mr. Whoever that is, I said, "What's going on? What happened with my son?" And the father asks, and the guy says, "Listen, your boy is sassing me. And either you give him a licking, or I'm going to do it." The father asks the boy to come here, puts him on his knee, over his lap, pulls his pants down, and with tears rolling down his eyes, the father's eyes, he beats his son to protect his son from being beaten by the white guy.
What year did this happen?
I'm assuming in the early 60s. And this is a man who said, "I never experienced racism." Now,
He had buried that, obviously.
yeah, but those kinds of stories, whether they're my story or what I authentically heard and can tell compellingly, to me, is a way to have people stop their breath, whether they're far right, far left, black, white, Latino, you know, whatever. And then here's the thing. This is a Malthusian kind of thing I'm thinking of. And then now, in the group, that's a story I've just shared. And Harold, you have your story, which, well, everybody has their stories. And now I'm going to say to the people in the webinar, or the people in the workshop, or the people in the room, when you were listening to that story, what story came up for you about your own life that maybe had nothing to do with that story, but you couldn't suppress, that thought or feeling came up? Whoever's willing to go first, I want you to share your story. And I'm assuming this is a mixed group. In corporations, gay, straight, older, younger, you know, different races and backgrounds. Arab, Jewish, because one of the fellows is going to be here, but I have to interview him in New York. It's a fellow who's working, a young rabbi who went to the Middle East and for 6 years of working with Arab and Jewish reconciliation and stories that he has. And then when you invite people and empower people to say your story is important, just like this guy's story is, they begin to share a story. And the belief is that there becomes a permission, an empowerment, and a contagion, because the idea is contagious empathy is what I'm talking about. How do we create contagious empathy in our work and in an organization or in a classroom or in a workshop? And that those stories then become, it could be all kinds of things. It could be chapters in a book. It can be segments in a film. Or certainly chapters in a webinar, I mean scenes in a particular webinar, or just an authentic live experience that other people can then experience, however that is. And how do I, and here's like just, happens to be an article that was in the Harvard Business Review very recent, yeah, it was kind of recently, September 21st, 2015.
Yep, that's good.
And it's after the Jeff Bezos Amazon headline about how workers at Amazon are feeling abused
Oh yes,
and
that was
mistreated.
going around. Yeah,
And in the research that these folks have done with Fortune 500 companies here, but around the globe, they've done surveys about what issues do you think boldness, perseverance, grit, toughness, technical skills, and consistently empathy and emotional intelligence come out as 1 or 2 in what they think is most significant to help teams be innovative, survive, get the best information in order to deliver your service or product.